Great. Let me know when it's on. I can't see it on my screen.
It's on now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is the 10th of our webinar series with Procter & Gamble South Africa and We Connect International in South Africa. So we're really excited. Today we go to legal basics for SMEs. As we all know, there's so many things and so many buckets that we have to deal with around legal and running a business, employing people, and now we've got the complexities of COVID-19 too. So we're really grateful to have Tammi on board to help us think through some of those difficult issues, and sometimes we just need somebody to point us in the right direction. My name is Jean Chawapiwa. I'm the Country Director for We Connect International in South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us. The session will be an hour long, and I'm going to hand over to Mikhail now from Procter & Gamble, who will then introduce us to Tammi, our P&G expert. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, just to add that there will be a feedback form at the end of the session. Please take the time to fill it in. We really appreciate your feedback. Okay, Mikhail, over to you.
Thanks, Jean, and thank you to everyone that's joined. Just a few reminders to keep on mute, please, so we don't get any disturbance from the background noise. And also, if you have any questions, can you please just send them through in the chat box on the right. So I'll hand over to Tammi, our legal expert, to take us through the final session today, which is legal.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining as well as for having me. It's great to see, well, at least I can see Jean for now, and I've seen some of you come on camera once or twice as we were starting. So I'll give you a little bit of wave. I, like many other women, I think, in the world, hate the camera, but I thought we'll turn it on, give you a little bit of a wave in the start so you can see who I am and what I look like. So hi, Haley, nice to see you too. Especially on this very chilly morning, but obviously in the interest of having a great presentation and you being able to see me clearly, hear the slides very clearly, once we've kicked off, I'll just turn it off, but don't worry, we can turn on the cameras again at the end and have a goodbye so we can all see each other, especially as Jean's mentioned, it's the very last session. So getting right...
Tammi, if I can just please ask you, your voice is still just a little too low. You may just need to get a little closer to the camera, to the microphone.
To the mic. No worries. I'll just shout into it a little bit, and then if
That's
it's too loud, you guys will have to turn me down if I get a little bit too loud. No worries.
All right.
In the interest of time, I think we'll just jump right into it and really get into setting the scene and the basics. So as you can see on the screen, it is the session today, as Mikhail called it, legal, but what we will essentially be covering is just the legal basics for SMEs in South Africa. So I know that may be, okay, what does that really mean? What does that really cover? But just to give you a quick snapshot of what we'll be covering today. First, just setting the scene, giving you a little bit of insights into the local legal landscape in South Africa. Where we'll probably spend the chunk of our time today is going to be on the risk areas. So hoping to have a very interactive session on this part. Of course, as usual, legal people are generally very prepared, so I've prepared some backup slides, but I'm hoping that everyone on the call will be very interactive and we get some great questions and we can use it more as a discussion than, just a legal lecture, so to speak. Then the last spot we'll be covering today, hopefully we'll have enough time, but of course that will depend on how interactive we are. Will just be a little bit of tips and tricks for you on when to involve professionals. So deep diving into it, as always, I don't think if in your life you've ever had a legal presentation before or had to speak to a lawyer, I don't think there ever would have been a time that you wouldn't have a disclaimer or a caveat thrown at you. So in true legal fashion, of course, there is a caveat to this webinar and this session as well today. Nothing to be scared of, nothing to freak out about. It's really just to remind everyone that this information, the examples we discuss, the real life cases, if anyone wishes to share, they are really just for informational purposes and to illustrate the kind of concepts that you need to understand and hopefully to point you in the right direction. It's not legal professional advice, and of course we remind you that if you do need professional advice, please contact your relevant professional advisor. So let's kick into it. I know you saw a flash of my face a little bit earlier. This was a slightly happier holiday picture, so I think it's always good to have one on the screen just so you know who on earth is discussing these great legal topics with you today. My name is Tammi, as Jean mentioned. My surname probably a lot easier to pronounce than it looks. It's McMahon-Panther. I am the legal counsel for Southeast Africa, covering the market operations for P&G. So that's really the day-to-day business. But also I have a part specialist role in all things e-business and digital as well. I've been with P&G for about 6 years, and despite what some people say that I still look like a kid, I have been practicing for over 10 years as a lawyer, both in private practice and corporate. So hopefully today we'll have the ability to have some fantastic discussions and really get into dealing with the challenges you see in your businesses, and hopefully we can, between all of us, get some great insights on how to deal with those and leverage the best legal basics we can. So just a little bit about the working in P&G. Obviously, I work as an in-house counsel, so slightly different to lawyers you might have met or interacted with in your personal capacity or also in your business life. In-house counsel really is, working for a company rather than a multitude of clients. So working for the one company, and obviously in this space, really acting as a generalist where we do anything and everything. So that's just a little bit about me, but I think let's dig into the meat of our session today, which will be more focused on you. So to get things kicked off, because I know it's a little bit chilly this morning, so really to get you hopefully into the legal mood. As Nicole and Jean mentioned this morning, a little bit earlier on, there is a chat box to the right panel of your screen on the WebEx screen that says chat. So all the questions and all the interactivity we're going to be doing today, we're going to be sharing through the chat box. So if you click on the chat and you click the to box, you'll see Mikel's name. Mikel is our host today, and he's going to be facilitating all the questions. So you can pick him as the person you want to send your question or response to. Of course, if you're kind and willing and you don't mind everyone seeing your question, you're welcome to pick to sending it to everyone as well. But to kick us off, I really just wanted to get a sense from you all, and hopefully you can just type your responses into the chat box pretty easily about what your legal IQ is. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where you think your legal IQ is, and then obviously today we'll try and deal with the question, where is your IQ lacking? So if you can kick off that now, that would be great. Just the number, nothing else needed. So if you can type in a 1 to 10, obviously as you do that, please remember no wrong answers. Don't be scared to say, oh, I'm a 1, because really the intent of the session today is not to go, oh, crap, I'm a 1, that's a terrible thing, but really just to try and increase your knowledge a little bit and figure out that maybe, okay, I'm at a 1 or a 2 or a 3, there's nothing terrible about that, but if I can increase my knowledge today and, get some insights about where to go, that would be fantastic. So I see we've got some coming in already, which is great. I'm seeing some 3s, some 5s, some 7s, another 5, another 4, and then a 4. Mikel, feel free to shout if you've got any separately sent to you as well, and then maybe we can just get a little bit of a consensus of where we are.
Thanks, Tammi. I think most of them are between 4 and 5 and ranges from 3 to 7 overall, but majority between 4 and 5.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Mikel. So it seems that everyone kind of feels like they're somewhere in the middle, kind of just having a straight face. I think we had one of the lovely participants today being closer to the smiley face end of the scale, which is great. Just means we have someone to leverage in our discussions as well. But as I said today, it's great that we all are at least on the scale. We've had the session, I think, in previous years where we did have some people who thought they weren't on the scale at all. So it's always positive to know, at least today, we're all on the scale of having a legal IQ, which is a great place to start. So setting the scene, this is just going to be a quick introduction, really telling you a little bit about, I'm sure that most of you have had some experiences already, but also just sharing some information about setting the scene and where South Africa really fits into the SME landscape. So I know from a legal point of view, the one thing that I have often heard a lot of feedback about and a lot of maybe not so positive feedback from business owners has really been that South Africa is one of those places where we're probably one of the most regulated markets, at least in Africa for sure, and very closely, nipping at the heels of our European counterparts in terms of a very complex environment, a very detailed environment, and also I think one of the things I've heard is, that there's a lot of red tape, but not just general red tape. There's so much red tape and regulation in areas that even business owners didn't necessarily think that there would be. So I think on your screen, I won't read them to you, but on your screen are really some of the most common ones. So really I think I hear a lot about tax being problems because, there's lots of regulations to follow. Labor laws is another one that's often very complex for small businesses because to a certain extent, our labor laws do allow for a little bit of flexibility for small businesses, but generally speaking, there's not a hell of a lot of flexibility. So we're all held to a similar kind of standard, whether you are the size of P&G with, 200 or 300 people in our local entity, or for a business, that only maybe has 50 people in its entity. So that's one of the complex areas as well that I think is very important to get your head around. CRP registration, CRPC, so the Companies and Intellectual Properties Commission, otherwise known in other countries really as the Companies Registry. So often we get a lot of feedback that they're not as efficient as they could be. It's very difficult for small entities who don't really have some kind of corporate knowledge about how on earth do I go about registering my company, doing things like changing directors, getting shareholders, and all of those kind of things. So that's also an area that's been, I think, a bit of a pain point for some SME owners. And because of our regulated environment, of course, BEE also pops up as one that's also difficult to navigate. Luckily, for the most part, I think this is one of the areas where there's been a little bit of more flexibility by the government in terms of how the regulations apply to small and medium enterprises. So there are a lot of at least flexibility in terms of not to the nth degree of the regulations apply to smaller companies. So that's one place I think where the government really has created that flexibility and allowed us to have a little bit of wiggle room. Of course, there's always going to be the fact that in such a regulated environment as this, where there are many, many legal and regulatory considerations, it's always going to be exceptionally hard for startups and SMEs, especially when they want to scale and grow their business. But hopefully what today will do is help you to point you in the right direction and give you some insights and learnings on where you can go and where to look if you are facing these kind of challenges in your day-to-day. So how to address, obviously, this issue, because, of course, that's one I think that we absolutely get. We absolutely, I'm sure you feel on your day-to-day basis. But I really think the takeout from this slide and the way that we really can address this issue, especially I know when people get a bit nervous when it comes to it's legal stuff, do I really need to get involved in that? I'd rather just focus on, my actual business, making money, creating a profit, and serving consumers. That's really where I'd like to instead focus. But how you can really learn to navigate this area is by educating yourself. I know that everyone always says, there's that old tale or fable about prevention is better than cure. But when it comes to legal and regulatory aspects, I definitely say that prevention is better, but also less expensive than the cure for sure. Because as much as possible, if you at least can prep your business and prep your system, to be in a position where at least you have some kind of idea of what's expected of you and you have some kind of compliance, then of course, when those terrible things or those not so great things happen to you, and you haven't maybe had a perfect plan in place, you at least have something in place to mitigate your risks and to make sure that you have some kind of way to deal with it. I think the worst thing that could happen, of course, for an SME or any for small business that's really trying to get a good foot in the market, the worst thing would be to have not only a challenge in the legal or regulatory space with your business, but to absolutely not even understand what that means for your business or the impact it could have. So really upskilling yourself and educating yourself as much as possible is a great thing. I know that everyone always says that, be careful when you go on Google and be careful what you find on the internet. Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. But what they are in these slides, and hopefully by sharing amongst us what we'll be able to learn, is that there are some also reliable resources. So if you make sure that you're using the right resources to research issues that are relevant to your business or to educate or upskill yourself, you will be in a great position to at least have an understanding of the effects of these issues on your business. Of course, in these kind of situations, it's never a bad thing to have a professional on call or on standby for when you need them, and don't be scared to use them. Because great for us in the time of 2020, but also in the time of COVID-19, there really is a push to be having, different kind of legal services than we had before. Before, we had the traditional good old, here's a law firm, big budgets, high fees, and maybe not necessarily completely tailored to the SME market. But these days, really, there's flexibility in the markets. There's a lot of small business owners just like yourselves in the legal space who can offer their services, really, partner with your company from the ground up and become almost an indispensable business. And of course, there's also on-demand legal services, freelancers in the space, legal consultancies, all of those kind of other options, that we really can move towards rather than thinking of just the traditional big five law firms, so to speak. So that was just to really give you a taste, and I know we went through it quickly, but this is just so we can, of course, get to the nice meaty part of today. But that was just a quick snapshot of really, I think, where we are in the market as a South African country and where potential challenges can be. So the meaty part of today and the time where we really want to spend the bulk of our time and hopefully discussing and interacting would be on the risk areas for small businesses. Figuring out, okay, where are your weak spots and where can we really learn more and where can we really leverage each other's skills to become better in these areas and then obviously have not only a successful business, but a compliant business. So what you will see on your screen now are some common risk areas. I've put them into 4 buckets. These are purely 4 buckets that I think, from my experience working with small companies, working in private practice, but also with a multinational like P&G, that affect small companies and big companies alike. Areas that we often have issues in, areas that we often need to dig a little bit deeper in so we can get more experience. So to really have an interactive discussion on this, what I want to do is, while I'm talking, have a look over these buckets. Think of your own personal scenario. So think about where in your life you've faced challenges in these areas, or maybe even, let's think positively, if you have a great story to tell us, a story that's where you've overcome something, or even if you just have a comment or a question that falls within these buckets, pop that in the chat box to Mikkel, send it to Mikkel so that he can collate all the questions. What we'll do is obviously try and keep, all the ones in bucket 1 together, all those in bucket 2 together, and that also just helps in case there are similar questions, then we can channel them all at the same time. Also, though, at the same time, in case you're shy, it also allows you to be able to send us your questions or your comments or your stories discreetly to Mikkel as well, and he'll share them without your name, so it gives you an opportunity, in case you're a little bit shy, not to have to unmute yourself and talk. But of course, we will have time for some more questions at the end as well. So while you are doing that, while you're thinking of your questions, while you're sticking those into the chat box, what I'll do is just to obviously give you some time to do that. I will just go very quickly through with a short explanation of what each of those buckets would consist of, maybe some thoughts that you would have to be doing about those buckets. And then we will pause at the end when we get to number 4, and Mikkel can share some of the questions with us. Okay, so bucket number 1, corporate tax and ethics. At this stage, I absolutely have to give you a disclaimer about my level of tax knowledge. I have a very basic level of tax knowledge, just like I'm sure most of you. I rely on a tax professional to, do my tax returns for me, but I'll try my best to point you in the right direction when we're talking about tax topics, or if there are any tax questions. I think the corporate bucket, generally speaking, comes first. And always important because it really is the basis of your business. So what kind of structure are you going to have in your business? Are you going to be a sole proprietor? Are you going to be a partnership? Or do you want to go the whole hog and have a private company? So obviously making sure you have the right business type is important up front, because you want to have the right structure, but also you want to be able to register your company if needed with CRPC, who obviously is part of the Department of Trade and Industry, and they help with the registration of companies. Also, what they do is, I think this is something that's a little bit less known, is that what they also do is the IP part in the CRPC is actually related to intellectual property. So the same people that register your directors and your shareholders, and when you're changing the address for where you keep your business documents or where your business is located, those are the same people that also deal with things like copyright, etc. Those kind of IP related registrations. So that's one of the bodies that actually cross over buckets. But corporate is, of course, important, like I said, not only to get your company started or your entity started right up front, but also to make sure you're compliant going forward. So, of course, if you're looking at getting funding for your business, that's something that your corporate structure will need to be very closely playing together with, because obviously different types of entities will have different types of models. So that's something that's very important. Tax, of course, always great, like I said, to have a tax practitioner. Especially because they'll have the expertise to tell you, when do you have to register with SARS? What are you going to register as SARS with? For the most part, I'm assuming most of us on the phone will be registered as a small business company with SARS, which likely means that there are a little bit less hoops for you to jump through. But of course, also important to keep your books and accounts and records in good stead, and the tax practitioner or an accountant can really help you with that. Obviously, not all kinds of entities will necessarily be registered for tax. Some, like a private company, so PTY Ltd, as you may know them, they would automatically be registered with SARS when you register on the CRPC system. But the others not necessarily so, because there are different kind of caps about, how much money does your company make in terms of turnover, and then there are different options of, different kinds of tax you can work with. For example, turnover tax, which is generally what they think of for smaller entities who are doing less than R1 million in turnover in its first year. But then, of course, there is the ability, of course, to have normal companies tax, like a P&G will pay, just at a slightly different percentage point, where this is really related to taxing your profits, not necessarily taxing your turnover. So different kind of complexities there. Ethics, I think that's maybe a slightly easier one. We can definitely just say that if you use the P&G motto about doing the right thing, then that is an accurate capture of what ethics is. Ethics are important not only just to have a business that's full of integrity, but it also helps to strengthen your reputation as a company, because if people know that you are ethical, if they know that you operate with integrity and you never trying to do one over on others, then that is the kind of company that people want to do business with. So that's why ethics is really important in a company structure. I see that some of the questions are coming in on the chat, and I know probably some have gone to Mikkel as well. So let's maybe just whiz through the next three buckets, and then we can get to the nice meaty parts of the questions. So bucket number 2, consumer protection, media, digital, and IP. So IP being intellectual property, as we mentioned. If you're registering trademarks, patents, designs, copyrights, those kind of things, that would all fall into that bucket. Very important to make sure that those kind of valuable assets of your business actually are protected in the right way, and you know how and when to protect them. Media and digital, more important as we go, because of course, often small businesses, most parts when they're just starting out or trying to grow their business, will get their traction online. They'll, build a digital presence, really make people aware of what's happening out there through relatively inexperienced inexpensive methods, like, for example, the social media, having a Facebook page, having an Instagram page. Many of those platforms now also, of course, have shopping options, which is fantastic for small businesses. The ability to have people shop from your Instagram page, shop from your Facebook page. I think that's really opened up a lot of new avenues for the SME who may in the past have thought, okay, I'm a tiny business. Now do I have to go and get a website, set up that whole complex process right at the start, when I'm still learning about how my business works. So social media is a great way to start before you go into a full-blown, e-commerce economy. Of course, maybe I'm a little bit biased because of my e-business focus in P&G, but of course, e-commerce and e-business really the way of the future, especially in times like COVID-19. I think we learned that it's a way you can really leverage and work with your business. Consumer protection, always important, making sure that, the consumers that we serve, whether at a multinational level like P&G or yourselves as SMEs, making sure the consumer is happy with the product they've gotten or the service they've gotten. We have not misled them in any way. We've made sure that the service or the product is performed how it should be, and really just making sure that they're having a great experience, not only so that we're compliant with law, but also, of course, so that we make sure that we have a good reputation in the market. Labor and employment, bucket 3. I don't think we need to say much about this. Everyone knows that we have a very regulated labor market and a lot of things that are, complexities we have to deal with regards to employees, how to discipline them, what kind of contracts we have to have in place with them, how you pay them, benefits, and all of those kind of things. So that's really one that I think SMEs have a little bit of a difficult time sometimes navigating, especially if you're a business owner, who's really been on the other end of the scale and been the employee in the past. It can be quite a mindset change to move from an employee to an employer. Last but not least, antitrust and competition law. Not a trick question. They are the exact same thing. They both are competition law, just in the EU and the UK, and actually in the US as well. They like to call it antitrust. Here in good old South Africa, we call it competition law. Essentially, the whole point of this is making sure that everyone who plays in the market together plays fairly. No one is, of course, trying to hoodwink consumers, but of course, we're not engaging in things like cartels. You may remember a few years ago, there was a bread cartel. A lot of big producers got together and they fixed the price of bread. Obviously not great for consumers, and that's what competition law is focused on regulating. So, Mikhail, over to you to give us our first question.
Great. We have quite a few questions. There's 2 on IP, so I'm just going to put them together. Is there a good source to get the basics on IP law? And then earlier when you touched on the CPIC can help with IP registration, how do you start to secure software, particularly to protect your product, software IP to protect your product from competition?
Okay. Let's dig into those, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. If there's a part I've left out, feel free to pop a note to Mikhail and say, hey, I only answered half the question, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try and give you the brief, short answer. So let's start at the CRPC part, because I think that's a great place to start. So the CRPC is great, and it's a fantastic resource, because actually what many people don't realize is that if you have some kind of knowledge about intellectual property, and about the different kinds of intellectual property that there are, and how to use them, and what's most applicable to your business, if you already have that kind of knowledge, it's fantastic, because you can actually register your IP on the CRPC website yourself. You don't actually really need anyone to do it for you. Of course, you can apply for a service if you want to. That's totally at your own discretion. Of course, it's always sometimes important, if you don't have that base knowledge, to really think of, okay, would this be something I want to copyright? Is there a patent that I need to get? Then that's where I would definitely suggest that legal advice is great to get, especially just because when you do that application, it's not automatically granted. So let's say, for example, you want to trademark a brand name. So a brand name, like think of a P&G product like an Olay or whatever the case may be. If you want to trademark that, it's not as easy as going, okay, I'm registering Olay. Okay, what category or what class? That's the IP language that they use. It essentially just means, what kind of type of product or service are you relating to? So, okay, I want to use it in beauty and skincare. Maybe I want to go a little bit broader, and maybe I'm going to have some perfume in that range as well. I want Olay perfume, just using it as an example. You'd register it in those classes, and then, hey, once you've paid your money and press submit, once the CRPC comes back to you, it will automatically be approved. That's not necessarily the case, because of course, there are existing trademarks to consider, brand names that already may be in the market, all of those kind of things that you have to consider. So that's why it is one area that is probably not a bad idea to get some expert advice. I know part of the question was really, where can we get some expert advice? This is just obviously my personal opinion, so of course go for it to research and dig a little bit deeper into, of course, where maybe something you want to obviously focus your areas on and the kind of service provider you want to use. But what I would recommend is that you have non-traditional options in the space, in the IP space. Of course, we have the big law firms, all have IP departments, happy to help you, probably charge you a good whack of money. But what we also have is a lot of smaller legal consultancies, and there is a website specifically in my slides that you can check out at the end, because of course you'll get a copy of the websites for all the slides we didn't go through. But one of them is actually for a legal consultancy, a really smaller, niche kind of legal consultancy, and why I'm recommending them to you and why I'm actually suggesting them to you is because they are actually very much focusing their business on helping the smaller companies in the market. So you will find them. They're called pop.law. Their website will be absolutely in the deck, so you can get it afterwards. Them and many other legal consultancies who work in this area, I'd suggest someone like them, because not only do they have some great, I know obviously very more basic, but very great quote-unquote lessons on their website, sharing of some, free information, which I know SMEs, the costs are always an issue, so some free information to just get you kick-started is always fantastic. But also what's great is those kind of legal consultancies not only give you some kind of free information available to you, and there's also obviously some free information on the CIPC website itself explaining its processes and how to work through it, so that's another great resource you could check out. But also they're the kind of people who could do a tailored project, hopefully at a lower fee that you can negotiate with them, and a great resource so that if you want to register and protect your IP, you could absolutely do that. Mikkel, sorry, I know there was a software part to that question that I might have missed.
No, I think you covered it. It was just on how to get the IP on the software and how to start that, but I think you covered that.
Okay, great stuff.
There's actually another one on IP, and in relation to your last point about the cost part, it's how can you save costs on terms of service, privacy policy, and license agreements when you start out?
That is a fantastic question, and I think always one of the struggles that SMEs have, because I know that back in the day, many of you will remember CNA. CNA used to sell these quote-unquote template contracts, literally a piece of cardboard, and you could pick them up for a variety of contracts, not even just, the topics like privacy policies, license agreements, and all of those kind of good things. In this area, I think if you have some legal background or expertise, and there may be some of you that do that, you could probably get away with finding a basic template on the internet and, quote-unquote, specifying it to your needs. If I were you, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that kind of method, because of course, those are very basic. A lot of them are designed for very specific cases, or very basic. Or the flip side, they're very general and they don't really cover much. So that is a route you can go, and probably the cheapest of all the options. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that. What I would look at in this case, and again, you don't necessarily need, a traditional law firm who's going to do your end-to-end scenario, charge you a hell of a lot of money and hours costed for every single kind of agreement. What I'd suggest is that if you do the legwork before, think of it, what are your actual needs? What do you need in a contract? What are you looking to cover? What are your, maybe you have some learnings from previous cases where you unfortunately got bit in the butt and now you want to protect yourself against that. Think of all of those, jot them down and say, okay, for example, I need a license agreement that covers A, B, C. These are my big risk areas. Go to a freelance legal provider, legal consultancy, those kind of guys who offer on-demand services, and bear the cost, which may be a little bit more than you want to spend, but of getting a customized template agreement. One that you will then, once you've paid that once-off money, and obviously come with fairly good instructions of how to fill it in, how to complete it, so that when you come to having those needs later on, this kind of a license agreement from client, or you want to license something to client A, or something be licensed to you, not only will you have that knowledge, you'll also have a quote-unquote almost ready-to-go template. So that's probably the middle ground of being able to save some kind of costs, but also protecting yourself so that you just don't have a standard basic off the internet or from CNA kind of template, which you hope protects you, and then when the pedal hits the metal, it's actually not what protects you or what you need. Mikkel?
Great. There's one on shareholder agreements. I believe a stamp is required on the shareholder certificate. Are there online shareholders agreements that are acceptable?
Look, that's another area I think that we can pretty much apply the same advice that I've first said. You could for sure get, a standard template shareholder agreement off the internet, but not necessarily something I'd recommend, because I think of all things, more than anything, the setup of your business and the roles and responsibilities of each of the stakeholders goes to the core of your business. And when times are tough and things get hard, if you haven't discussed and properly thought about and got everyone on the same page about key things, about what everyone will contribute to the business, what each person's role is, and of course, thinking about differences between, for example, directors in a company and shareholders. Because I think many people may confuse the two and think that every director has to be a shareholder. Not the case. You can have directors in a company who obviously have certain directors' responsibilities and things they have to do for the running of the company. But then you have the shareholders who, of course, pump money or give you investment or some other kind of aid to run your business. And that's usually for a part or share of your business. So in a shareholder agreement, that's something I would absolutely, let you go to a professional and get proper advice rather than using, template agreements. There's a template agreement for almost anything on the internet, so I'm sure you could find one. But spend your money on that. It's definitely a good area because, like I said, when it comes to, money being paid out, profits of the business, who they're allocated to, where they go, where when you pay the dividends to those shareholders, those can be exceptionally tricky issues. So you want a really fantastic shareholders agreement upfront so everyone knows what the money is for, what it's being used for, if you have to pay it back, do they get equity, all of those kind of things are ironed out in a fair way for everybody from the start.
Great. And the next one is, if I had a contract with a company for years and the contract ended, we then find out we had undercharged on some of our invoices, can we go back and try to get paid?
Oh, this is an exceptionally tricky one. Nicole, you will know because I'm sure you face this in your purchasing life at P&G as well. You live and die by the contract that you have in place. So that's also probably, I think we're starting to get on a trend here of why you need to have a good template contract in place, and you need to have, whether this is with suppliers, whether it's with customers, whatever the case may be, you need to have a good basis in place because you live and die by that contract. So that would be a question that I know people hate this answer from lawyers, but sorry, I'm going to have to give it to you. It would depend on the terms of your contract. So if, for example, in your contract you had agreed for ABC pieces of work, that this would be the charge that people would have to pay for that work, and you fulfilled your obligations and they paid you that money, there's no way you can now go back to them and say, sorry, actually, I didn't charge you enough because I undervalued my services. So it's a little bit of a tricky one. Of course, if you had some special language in your contract about that, then we may be having a different conversation, but that's very unlikely because I haven't very often seen that. So that's always why it's important to, A, have a good contract in place, but B, also, as SMEs, I think it's one of the most critical things is don't undervalue your services. Do some research in the market, even if it's looking on the internet, getting quotes yourself for services, see what other people are charging in the market and charge a fair amount based on that. Don't think, oh, just because I have less experience, it's my first year as an SME, that you have to charge next to nothing for your work and then obviously regret it now when you've potentially got more experience in the market and realize that, you could have charged double.
Great, and I'll touch on the last one before we can move on. It's actually COVID related. So is it my responsibility as the employer to give all my staff and contractors masks and sanitizers? What should we do if they're losing masks and some not washing them daily as requested?
Oh, this is a tricky one because, yes, we have COVID regulations that very clearly specify that if you are expecting employees to come to work and be, actually performing their duties, you will have to supply these basic PPE items at your own cost versus the cost of the employees. I know that there have been some kind of disputes that you may have seen some in the news about, employers trying to charge these costs. Unfortunately, it's one of the areas where the regulation, and fair enough, you can understand that in the time of COVID, the government did not necessarily have an opportunity to consider each and every potential, outcome from making this kind of a regulation to say that yes, the employer has to provide it. So, of course, please don't hold me to this because, like I said, not professional legal advice, but what I could potentially recommend in a situation like this, because one of the areas you'll be worrying about, of course, is non-compliance with the regulations. So figure out what would be a fair and a reasonable amount of PPE to provide to ensure that you are compliant. Obviously, don't charge your employees for that. I would then make them, for example, obviously what's reasonable would depend on, are they disposable, are they cloth masks, are you giving them a liter of sanitizer or are you just putting the sanitizer in the office? Those kind of things would come into what is considered reasonable. And then you could, for example, implement something like a register. So say, hey, if it's a cloth mask, think of what you believe is a reasonable amount. I provided my employees with 10 cloth masks at one go. They signed for them, so I have a record to show the government if they ever come and ask the question that I provided them, and it obviously wasn't at their cost, and that is what they are expected to use, over the period. And in that case, I'm not saying you'll be in the clear and freer, for example, if people like you are saying losing masks, that kind of a thing, but at least you have a record to show that you complied. One thing you may want to do, of course, though, but obviously depending on the resources you have available, is if, for example, cloth masks being left at home is an issue for you, or being lost, or whatever the case may be, you may also want to provide a limited amount and really share on an exceptional basis for. Okay, someone came into the office, they forgot their mask at home. Obviously, it could potentially happen. Have a disposable one for them to use for that day, because you do ultimately have that responsibility to ensure your workplace is safe as well. So it's not something you can just throw up your hands and say, oh, my employee lost it, good luck to them, I'm never helping them again. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but that would be the best recommendation I have.
Great. There's just one last one that came through now, Tammi. It's well, actually two. So do you want to proceed and we can touch on them at the next Q&A stop, or would you want to touch on them now?
Mikhail, I'm happy to do them now because I think we've had a lot of fantastic questions. So maybe we take this last two now, and then we spend 2 minutes on the two slides about when to involve professionals, and then we can start our wrap-up if that works for you timing-wise.
Great. That's perfect. This one is with regards to consumer protection insurance. I pay a lot of money for consumer protection insurance and lawyers. Is there a cheaper way? Paying an expensive retainer is very difficult during the COVID time.
That's an interesting one, and I think this one came on the chat from Sister Jenny. So maybe while we answer the second one, Sister Jenny, if you just want to type a quick note to Mikhail, I'm very interested to hear what kind of insurance you have and what it covers, because consumer protection insurance, just on the face of it, just by you saying those words, is not something that's super common. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. Maybe while we take the second question, you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Great. The second one, I'm actually there's two, so I'm just going to have it as one. It's, do you need to update your employee or third-party contract with the COVID-19 regulations stipulated in the recent Gazette to protect your company from any business risks? And do all businesses need to have indemnity insurance in place?
Oh, lots of parts to that question. I'll try and answer as quickly and succinctly as possible. On the employee contracts, that is one area that there's no absolute requirement for you need to updating your contracts. Generally speaking, we always have to remember that updates to employment contracts are not something you can do unilaterally as an employer. If you're changing potential terms and conditions of employment, that's something that an employee would, have to participate in and agree in. So in my experience over the last few months, I've not seen any companies, including P&G, who's done that. Really, of course, where there are things that are dictated by the regulations, such as, having flexible work schedules or being able to work from home or rotational shifts, those are something that, for the most part, I think have been managed by communication with the employee and explaining to them that this is not something you're doing just because you feel like it. It's something that you are obliged by law to do, and therefore have the obligation to impose in the slightly different change of work. So that's the basis I'd suggest that. third-party contracts is an interesting one because I think one of the most common questions that has popped up in third-party or supplier contracts, and Mikhail, I'm sure you've started to see this and hate this word, is that fancy word called force majeure. So that's just a fancy Latin word, but essentially these clauses were sometimes in contracts, but maybe at an SME level, not always in contracts. And essentially provides for, what is known in very commonly in English as the acts of God clause. So saying, look, there are going to be cases when an act of God happens and I may not be able to fulfill my obligations under this contract as a result of that. So obviously there's sometimes always a little bit of a bun fight about what is an act of God. I don't think anyone ever, unless they were a psychic, considered the possibility of having to, think of COVID-19 as being something they would have to factor into it. But usually the kind of things that people like to include are, natural disasters. Sometimes in South Africa, a common one to try and include is protests. So, for example, if you have a giant community protest outside your business, people can't get into work, those kind of things. And then obviously you maybe, your people can't actually provide the service or the goods that you've been tasked to because of your inability to work. Or maybe it's your workers that are protesting or they've gone on a strike, whatever the case may be. So I think that's a clause that maybe wasn't as popular at an SME level that you should consider looking, does your contract have this? Do I maybe need this kind of protection, especially as a small business? And how do I want to apply it? Because, of course, there's the ability to say, if I can't provide the service for X amount of period, you can get it somewhere else, and I'll cover the cost up to, of course, my costs. Or, do I want to give you the other party the ability to get out of the contract? Those are the kind of things that you would consider in that kind of contract. But generally speaking, I don't think there's a need to necessarily change contracts as a result of COVID-19.
Great. And there's a bit of an expansion on the previous question with regards to just finding it, paying a lot of money for the consumer protection insurance and lawyers. So the expansion is, I pay a company for checking and advising compliance, and they defend me if someone complains, although no one usually complains about the quality, service, or products because they work.
Okay, so that to me, and thank you for the clarity, that to me sounds like, day-to-day complaints that consumers may have, oh, I don't like how your product works, I want to return it and you won't let me return it, those kind of day-to-day things that are covered by the Consumer Protection Act. I'm not saying that insurance is a terrible thing, but I have not commonly come across consumer protection insurance in this case. I'm not sure of the exact field you're in, but generally speaking, what most companies do, and this is obviously to ensure compliance from a consumer protection point of view, is the Consumer Protection Regulations Act and the regulations, of course, have certain things that you have to comply with. So, your products must work like you say they're for, or your service, provide the service you advertise, not trying to mislead or con consumers into entering into unfair contracts. Those kind of things are what they cover. And obviously your product's got to be safe to use. All of those kind of elements are things that the Consumer Protection Act covers. So for the most part, in my experience, how people have dealt with this is, and to ensure, of course, compliance with the law, you just need to have a process of how you handle consumer complaints. So, for example, if you have a Facebook page or a website, you obviously need to have a easily available way for them to complain. So whether it's a contact me page, or if you have complaints, email this contact address, whatever the case may be. And then obviously once you've received that complaint, you need to have a fair process for consumers to be having a chance to tell you what's wrong. You obviously explain your version of the side of the story. And then, of course, hopefully you're able to resolve it in some way. Some companies, of course, may say, okay, I try and give them my version of events, and, if they're still not willing to buy it, and obviously depending on what they ask as a consumer is, maybe a refund is the right way to go. There are obviously certain requirements that you, as a minimum, have to provide in terms of refunds under the Consumer Protection Act, or to return the product, give them an opportunity to buy another one. Do I replace the product? And, hopefully you'll be able to, on that basis, resolve it. If not, some companies will say, okay, the risk of, this going further, them referring it to, for example, the National Consumer Commission, which is a quote-unquote ombudsman for consumer complaints, or if you're on the consumer space like P&G, there's the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman. So some companies will say, okay, I don't want them to go further and, just waste more of my time and energy on that. So maybe, to come to a happy conclusion, without admitting any liability or fault, I'll just offer the person, maybe a discount on their next purchase, maybe a coupon, something of that sort, if of course it's not something about them not wanting the product at all, because then they might not like those options. So that's how they're generally settled. After that, of course, if the person does go further and they go to the NCC or the CGSO, at that stage, I still don't necessarily think you need lawyers involved or insurance, because most of the disputes are still pretty simple. They're not very complex kind of disputes. Consumers complaining about something about a product, not liking it, it didn't work like I wanted to. And the point of the NCC and the CGSO are actually to try and act as a mediator to get you to a happy resolution. So even at that stage, you may get to one of those resolutions we talked about before, about like a refund, a return, providing them with a coupon, give their money back, whatever the case may be. And then that's the end of the matter. So I think there are pretty limited cases where you may need expert legal advice. Of course, always with the caveat that there are some cases that may be super serious and you really do need one. But for the most majority of the cases, I think you could handle them in that way without necessarily having the insurance or paying a big retainer for a lawyer, because like I think you even mentioned, you don't get a hell of a lot of complaints. So it's maybe not the best use of your legal budget, so to speak.
Great. Thanks for all the interactions, everyone. Tammi, I think we can move on, and then a few questions that may come in, we can touch on at the next Q&A session.
Okay, great stuff. Guys, I do understand that in the interest of time, we are running short of it, and apologies, that's probably me talking a bit too much as well. But as Mikhail said, thanks very much for the fantastic questions. So for now, you're just going to have to close your eyes very quickly, maybe rest your eyes for a quick break as I flick through all of the slides. You'll see, don't worry, don't feel like you missed out anything. These slides were absolutely just the backup slides in case we didn't have fantastic interaction. Thankfully, we have had very, very good interaction today and much appreciated. Hopefully it was valuable for everyone to hear other people's questions and then also, hear what the response or the suggestion was as well. So just the last, before we start wrapping up and dealing with any final questions, is about when do we call in the professionals? Not to read through the slide piece by piece, but I think the overarching premise here that's a really good one to bear in mind is, okay, what does this piece of work mean for me and how will it potentially affect my business? So like I mentioned, a great example from earlier, if you're thinking about important agreements you may need or contracts you may need, I would suggest absolutely spend some money up front, get really, really good templates that you can reuse, yourself easily. And that would be something that I would see as being worth the cost, because it's once off, and then you'll be able to, be very compliant and have a great framework in place moving forward. Of course, the options available to you, and like we were talking about, is not just, the big 5 law firms. We have a fantastic array of options, legal consultancies, like I mentioned to you, where there's online resources, for example, that in some areas, like for example, and these links, don't worry, all in the presentation, so you don't have to write them down or remember them. Like in the labor space, for example, there's a fantastic site called laborguide.co.za. A very passionate bunch of lawyers who have expertise in the labor space and also IR or industrial relations professionals. They have a lot of, forums where you can actually type questions, people can respond to you. They also have a lot of useful topics that they put up. So, for example, they'll put up a 1 or 2 pager if they get a lot of questions on a specific area. So really familiarizing yourself with those resources, then to educate yourself first, and then you'll be in a better position to see, okay, this is a really big risk area to my company. The value of this going wrong is probably very high, so this is an area where I need to call in a professional. So, of course, you have the option for traditional attorneys and law firms. There's big law firms, small law firms. It doesn't mean smaller law firms provide less quality of service. They provide, if you pick the right one, equally great quality of service and usually at a lower cost. There are the consultancies as well, mostly manned by actual lawyers, but obviously just do your research into, checking the reviews of the company, see if you have anyone who's, interacted with them before. That's always a good way to go. Legal process outsourcing, that's an LPO. So if you're doing kind of work that is very repetitive but not and very labor intensive but doesn't require a hell of a lot of actual legal analysis, so kind of like a copy and paste of multiple things that you're just doing over and over. If that's something that is a day-to-day for your business, then an LPO is the way to go. They can give you bulk budgeting for doing that work because it's kind of repetitive and they usually automate it in some fashion. On-demand legal services, so there are those online that you can even get legal advice online. Of course, just research and find the great one that you can do. And obviously, there's always the option to have a legal person in-house, but that really depends on, the kind of scope of the legal work that you have and the need for your business. But if not, there are always obviously outsourcing opportunities. So you can get quote-unquote consultants on your book for a relatively cheap fee. Of course, if you're making lots of money and you have a bigger legal budget, of course, you could always get, a law firm on retainer. But really, for that, you would need to figure out, is it a cost saving for you, or is it, maybe in the consumer protection case we mentioned, maybe not the best use of legal budget, because in that case, the number of actual consumer complaints and questions were relatively low versus the retainer amount. So you could probably get it for a cheaper and more cost-effective price if it was done on an ad hoc basis. So that is just hitting you with the highlights of when to call in the legal professionals. And like I said, these are some of the useful resources. Here the DTI has a nice IP booklet as well for all of you who are very interested in IP thing. CISO very useful for labor advice and general business advice. Also have a lot of free articles, so just getting used to those resources is a great thing. This is what we covered today. I know it was really kind of a whirlwind, but I really thank you for your time. And I hope that you found it useful and interesting. And Mikkel, Jean, thank you for the invitation, and over to you for the wrap-up.
Great, thanks. Tammi, I think we can touch on the two questions that we have before Jean wraps up. The first one is, I've worked for over a year with no contract in place as the employer hasn't signed one, but there's proof of work. How should I handle that?
Okay, so I'm assuming in this case the person was the employee. Well, it's fantastic that you were such a great employee and worked for so long. Unfortunately, although the employment contract wasn't signed, it doesn't mean you don't have any rights, because of course you don't have to have, well, it's an obligation of the employer to at least as a minimum actually provide you with I can't remember the actual name now, but essentially it's a statement of your work details. So there are some absolute minimums that they have to include, and they're legally obliged by law to provide you with that. So it would be an outage for sure that an employer hadn't at least provided you with that. In this case, of course, because they weren't willing to sign the contract for whatever reason. But that doesn't mean you aren't an employer. Aren't an employee of the company, so that still gives you the same legal rights. Hopefully that there would be some kind of consensus on your benefits and your pay, etc. So you would absolutely still be able to exercise, unless there was some crazy exception I'm not aware of, you would be able to be considered an employee of the company and be entitled to all the rights under the Labor Relations Act, the basic conditions of employment, and etc. So just the fact that they didn't sign the contract doesn't prevent you from having those benefits and that protection.
Great. And the last question we can touch on is an extremely long one, so I'm going to go through it. If we're partnering with a company that makes an oil and has the IP on it, we use the oil in our products. How should we handle the legal around it? Do they get a percentage in our product sale? How do we protect our side of the product as they want the finished product sample to take to their labs for testing, to make sure the products used work well together? But our manufacturer isn't keen on this, as he says they can copy the product. How do we as an SME protect ourselves with the IP owner and the manufacturer?
Okay, that's a very detailed and very complex question. The answer is similarly detailed and complex, but I think the important thing here, just to obviously get legal professional advice. This is a case where I absolutely would suggest you protect yourself before, because of course there's parts of the product, quote unquote, that he owns, or ingredients that he owns the rights to, and parts that you of course own the rights to. So it's going to be a case of making sure that you have the right understanding on who owns what and what each person's obligations are, because of course usually people may have a product that they will, if you were thinking of a service or design or something, you would use the word licensing. So, they would give you the right to be able to use it in your products. That's very common. The testing parts and going back is something that's less common, so we need to dig into a little bit more about the who and the why behind that. But of course, I think the concern may range by your manufacturer of, if that is a completely separate product makeup and something that is designed by you and specific to you, that's absolutely something that you would want to get documented as to the reason why he's getting it and what he can do with it. And hopefully you could try and find a way that you could share it with him and he could achieve his end result of doing whatever analysis he wants to without, having the full background of the actual line-by-line items of ingredients and how it came together. That's a very short answer, but in this case, that's definitely a question. Protect yourself, get professional advice on that before you go ahead and just share everything, hoping that he's a good person.
Great. Thank you for joining, Tammi. Thanks for the time that you took to do this presentation, answer the questions, and thanks everyone on the call for being really interactive, sending through the questions, comments, and again, thanks, Tammi, and I'll hand over to Jean to close out.
Great. Thank you, Tammi. Loved the questions. We weren't able to go through all your slides, but I think it was a really great approach dealing with people's challenges, as it were, which is great. It's not often we get somebody of your capabilities able to get their time and get their input. So I really enjoyed that. I'm sure the recording will be listened to over and over again. And where you talked about using the professionals, I just want to remind the ladies that we do have legal firms within the WeConnect network, women-owned companies that also need your support. So please do use them. I saw that Michelle actually put one of the links for Nicoline's company on the chat. There's also Marguerite's company, and those on the WBE chat, please look up those ladies. So thank you. I'm just left to say thank you to Tammi. This was awesome. Thank you, Mikhail, for all your support through all of the 10 webinars that we've done with Procter & Gamble. It's really amazing that we're now at the 10th one. Yay! So great. Just for anybody on the call who may not be registered with WeConnect, please, just a reminder that you can go onto our platform, WeConnectInternational.org, and please register your company. We look forward to interacting with you and sharing more of this wisdom with you as well. So thank you, everyone. There will be a feedback form that will follow soon. Please take the time to fill it in. We really appreciate your input on all of the webinars. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tammi. Thank you. Really awesome. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Mikhail. Thanks.